Well, thanks for the invitation. And I think it's very fitting to be talking about keeping warm on a winter night. And having had a frost this morning, it reminded us that we are in the middle of winter. Righto. Around this time last year, I gave a presentation, similar topic, similar forum. And in The Age, the day before the presentation, there was this article. And it was talking about the standard of houses built in Australia and in particular in Victoria. And basically they were glorified tent according to a series of studies. Disappointingly, over a 12-month period, there hasn't been any significant changes and people are still living in those glorified tents. And some of you, by the end of the day, I'm sure you'll share with me some insights, and I suspect some of you are living in glorified tents when it comes to trying to keep your house warm. The Victorian government introduced a rating scheme in about 2005, which was rating houses from 0 to 10 in energy efficiency, and 10 is the top of the scale. You need no artificial heating and cooling, and the house will be warm and comfortable for the whole year in this climate. That's a 10. And a 0 is the tent. Here, most houses fit somewhere around 1.8 to 2. It's fairly miserable. Tonight I'm going to give you some insights and some tips on what you can do about that. Apart from bulldozing and starting again, there's opportunities to improve the thermal framework around the house and make it more comfortable and reduce your utility bills. So the key things that I want to discuss tonight is, somewhat ironically, given that you've been invited here to talk about keeping houses warm, I'm going to start with the need to keep the house cool. I'll explain more in a moment. There is method in the madness of what you'll hear tonight. Importantly, it's about keeping the warm air in the house, and then it's about keeping the heat in the house. They're two different things, and I'll explain the difference. And the sobering thing is, cold houses make people sick. Very sick. So in terms of the context of reducing your energy bill and reducing some of those utility bills, what's important is reduce your consumption. And there are ways to do that. But to reduce your consumption, all of these measures are not about going back to the dark ages and living in a cave. You can reduce your consumption and still be warm. And it's about modifying the time you use your energy for your different appliances to take advantage of the variable costs over a 24-hour period. If you know when it's cheap, that's when you use it, if you can accommodate with your lifestyle.
Geoff, are there many providers now that have the off-peak tariffs?
Yes, and I'll touch.
Mine have just got every day now.
Yep. So good point, and I'll touch on that in a moment. And yes, there's a cross section, so you do need to do your homework. And the last one in reducing your bills, investing in rooftop solar is still economically viable. It's very attractive if you've got the capacity to outlay the capital in the first place. So in terms of customising a house for hot climate, the reason I'm talking about that as a starting point is you need to keep the summer heat out before you try to keep the winter warmth in. Because if you get the sequence wrong and you don't deal with the unwanted sun coming onto your windows in summer, and you seal up all your gaps and you increase your insulation, in summer your house will be hotter. Now, in reality, sometimes it's hard to actually orchestrate that, but this presentation, while focused on keeping the house warm, you've got to think about the 12-month cycle, because you're in the same house in summer as you are in winter, and you've got to accommodate both issues in a more holistic way. You can't just deal with keeping a house warm and expect you'll have some windfalls in the summer as well. They're actually counterproductive. So if you look simply at what happens if the sun in summer is shining on your window, it's got a massive heat load into the house. So you've got to look at keeping that sun off the windows. And there's a lot of simplistic ways of just putting awnings on north facing. These two houses, North Shep, one next to the other. One's got an awning, one hasn't. Significant difference, summer temperatures. And facing north, windows facing north, you have near horizontal awning shading. In contrast, east and west, you want vertical protection. And that's just a reflection of where the sun is in the sky as it's hitting your house. Now, to put in context of where energy is used in the house, this pie chart tells many stories. And what I like about it is it signals here hot water takes up about 25% of your energy budget. And importantly, about half your budget is made up of heating and cooling. And tonight we're going to focus on the heating side of it, but be mindful that another big component is cooling. But when you start looking at the breakdown between it, it's not 50-50. You don't use the same amount of energy to cool a house as you do to heat it. In fact, you use typically around 60%, even higher in some houses, dedicated to heating. And some of you may well have asked the question, when you see new energy efficient houses being built in Northern Victoria without any eaves, and you may wonder why. The reason is the energy rating schemes recognise where the energy in a 12-month cycle is used. So the houses are designed with no or little eaves to maximise the winter sun coming into the house to reduce the winter energy bills. That's the logic. There's more to it when you start unpacking it, because the flip side is they've got a very hot house in summer and they have to turn the air conditioners down in order to reduce the temperatures to make it comfortable. And those double glass windows that are keeping the winter heat in the house, when the sun is shining on them in summer, it just goes straight through. So it's problematic, it's never simple, but that's why there aren't eaves. That's one of the reasons why there aren't eaves. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, with the hot water, as people are moving away from gas and electric big storage systems to heat pumps, you're getting 70, 80% reduction in the amount of energy that is used to heat the similar amount of water. So this pie is shrinking rapidly as people are moving towards it. The other little slither down here is lights. And what's interesting is, over the 17 years I've been working in this space, I've seen the arrival of the LED lights, first, second and third generation lights. And the efficiency of them is remarkable. And that slither is getting smaller and smaller every year. So when you're looking at your energy budget and someone forgets to turn the light off in the room next door, don't worry about it, because it does not use much electricity if you've switched to LED lights. Pick your battles. Turn the lights off is not one of them when you're talking about energy budgets. So in terms of where heat is being lost from a house, this stylised image here really encapsulates what's going on. And if you look at it, you've got around 25% is going up through the roof. You've got about 35% of the heat loss of a building going out through the walls, 15% going through the floors, and about 25% going out the windows. What I'm particularly interested in, which ones are the low fruit and easy to achieve, which ones are too hard and leave them alone. The message I'm going to leave with you, in nearly every house trying to stop the leakage through the walls, too hard, too expensive. Low priority. And if you're on a slab floor, forget it, you can't do anything about it. And if you're on an elevated wooden floor, if there's enough space under there for a tradie to get under there, then consider insulating that. But it's the roof and the windows that I'm particularly interested in, because they're the ones that are relatively easy to get access to and are with a reasonable price range to get a good outcome. So the key thing is keeping the warm air in the house. That's the priority. And there are many holes, many opportunities for that air to leak out. And that's why the analogy of a house leaks like a sieve or you're living in a glorified tent really applies to in terms of where the air can escape. A well-designed house will leak to the amount of, if you look at the volume of air in the house, over a 1 hour period, a really good house will lose about half the volume of the air that's in the house every hour. That's tiny leaks. That might equate to that much accumulated leaks through the whole house. Now that's best practice. The average house in Australia has about 25 times the volume of air that's in the house is lost every hour. So when you're turning the heater on, you're trying to heat the air, in an hour, 25 times if you're a typical house. And if you're a bit above average, you might only do 10 times. But it's a lot of air that's escaping. So that's why we focus on trying to keep the air in the house. Then we worry about the insulation and the warmth in the house. Deal with the air leakage. So the classic are these exhaust fans. They'll be in the bathrooms, the laundry, the shower, the kitchen. And they're about just getting those fumes out of the house. In the kitchen, you've also got a range hood. That's a bit different because they filter the air and they remove a lot of the aerosols, the fats that are in the air, and they filter them before they get ejected out of the living areas and out of the house. But the other ones, it's about getting the air and the moisture out. Now in the past, in houses that were built about 40 odd years ago, 30 years ago and earlier, these exhaust fans were not ducted. They were typically just exhaust direct into the roof cavity. So the moisture you're taking out of the bathroom is just going into the roof cavity. Whereas today, not only do when you put them in, you have to have them ducted to go outside the building. So either goes to the eaves or penetrates through the roof. So you don't get the accumulation of that moisture going into the roof cavity. And the same with the range hoods. In the past, you could exhaust into the roof cavities. That means there's a lot of fatty aerosols being accumulated in the roof cavity. Whereas today, you've got to duct it out and the filters regularly cleaned. So you can, and from the early 80s, these were supposed to be self-sealing. Now, we've done several thousand audits, climbed into roof cavities, and we know that even to this day, many houses are being installed without self-sealing exhaust fans. So essentially it's a hole in the ceiling and there's uncontrolled airflow going into the roof cavity and from the roof cavity back into the living area. And by putting in these retrofit, you can put these draft stoppers in, they sit inside the ceiling cavity above the exhaust fan, and they operate in a way that when the fan is off, those flaps are down and sealed, and when the fan is on, the air can get forced through. It's a good retrofit option. You can get them free under some of the government schemes, but because tradies will be operating in the roof cavity, you actually have to have an electrician to install these now in order to get the government grant. So there are other opportunities when I look and walk around houses. I see holes in the wall everywhere. Now these vents here, you will see them in different forms, and they were designed and required up until 1982 in every house in Australia. And they had a very important role, and it was about maintaining constant airflow in every room, every house and every room. And the reason they were required was because a long time ago, lights, rather than being run on electricity, were run on gas. So you had gas fumes being ejected from gas lights in houses. You also had wood heaters, so you had a lot of gas fumes and particles being dispersed in the house. And you had unflued gas heaters, which were putting gas fumes into the house, and there was a risk of all those appliances of the accumulation of carbon monoxide, which you don't smell, you don't hear, you don't taste, and it sends you to sleep, and sometimes you don't wake up. So these were very important. Up until 82, the government realised that We don't have ghost lights, very few unflue gas heaters, and people are getting a bit smarter in their fires, and they've shifted from open fires to Canaras and other box contained fires and less smoke generated in the house. So houses built after 82 don't have these walls, holes in the walls. But if you're in a house that was built before that, you got them. And sometimes you can actually see the light through. Now, if you do get someone to come and seal them, the important thing is you do not seal them from the outside. You leave that bit open. You only seal from the inside. And if you want to do best practice, you actually take the vent out and you put a breathable membrane in and you put some insulation in there and seal plaster paint, and you wouldn't know it was there. But you can simply put a bit of paper or plastic over that and you'll get 80% of the benefit, because it's about stopping the airflow escaping. Now, the reason you've got to keep them open on the outside is you've got a wall cavity and that has to breathe. You must maintain airflow in that. And that's what they're also serving a purpose. And if you seal that up and you don't allow the air to move in the air cavity, you'll get condensation and accumulation of moisture and the likely generation of mould. Not a good outcome. That's why you don't seal the holes on your house on the outside. You only deal with the inside. Now, here's an interesting thing that I've spotted on some houses. It's a fancy design, it's a shadow line, and it just is an architectural feature that it can be quite attractive. But what I've noticed is some houses, they all shift to different degrees, and the plaster moves away, and there's actually a gap forms in under there. And I've been to houses where I've put a sheet of cardboard and been able to go straight up into the ceiling cavity, and when I pull it out, I get covered in a shower of dust. So if you've got these, go around and check whether the gaps are there. They're not supposed to be there, but over time, as the house shifts, or if it was poorly constructed in the first place, it's a risk and it's a weak spot. The other one is these old air conditioners. Many people decommission them and they leave them in the wall. The problem with that is, one, air still flows. You cannot seal them up by just leaving them there. But also, because they're metal, they'll be transferring heat in and out. So it's a combination. You've got airflow going in and out. There will be drafts as a result of them. So they're problematic and need to be sealed. And then what we also see in some places, vents like this, which again are permanently open, connecting directly into the ceiling cavity. So that means uncontrolled airflow in and out, and if it's coming back in, it's bringing in dust and odours that are in the ceiling cavity. Not a good outcome. So one of the things we do with some of our home energy assessments, we have thermal imaging, and it's a toy, it's a novelty, it's good fun, and it tells plenty of stories and hides all the sins of the past. You can see where the heat is coming and going, so long as there's 10 degrees difference from inside and outside. Anything less and they don't work very well. You've got to have the 10 degrees difference. So on cold days or very hot days, they work very well. And what we're seeing here, this was taken in the summer, and what we're seeing is this is heat coming into the house through the vent. And this is a common occurrence. The other one is lights, down lights, whether they be halogen. Now, most people have switched their halogens over to LEDs, but particularly in the early days of the LEDs and early days of downlights, people had ones like this that you could pivot, adjust, and you had an air gap, again, uncontrolled airflow from the ceiling cavity into the living area. And they're problematic. They're a weakness and airflow is moving in and out. The good news is the LEDs that are now available, you can cover with bulk insulation. Not the blow-in, but the bulk insulation. So with these lights, when you switched from a halogen light that would get very hot, 180 degrees plus, you touch them, you burn your fingers, you would have to have a gap of insulation about so big. When they switched over to the LEDs, they were warm to touch and you only needed about 50 mil gap around. Now you can get LEDs that are rated and can be fully covered. So this makes a significant difference in terms of what's going on with your insulation. We'll touch on that in a bit more detail in a moment. But be mindful that now the current generation of LEDs, read the fine print, make sure you get the ones that have these codes, ICF or IC4, which is saying that they can be covered. They're certified to be covered. But if you've got blow-in insulation, you still need to keep a guard around them. So another weakness is if you've got the evaporative coolers, you will get airflow moving in and out, even the ones that have devices to seal off. Up on the roof, they will still leak, and these sort of covers do a fantastic job. They will do a fantastic job in stopping the airflow, but it's still a weakness in terms of insulation. And what you can do is you can put a thin layer of insulation under the lid, but it's still a weak point. The other air leaks are in the bathrooms. You'll find that in some cases, you've got these slotted louvered windows. Some of them are permanently open. Some of them you can adjust and close, but not seal. And before exhaust fans were very popular, these were very pragmatic. And it was great in getting the airflow and removing the odours that you want them removed from the bathroom. The other thing is you would see, of course, these wall vents that I've talked about before, but also typically people have the window open. Now, this can be problematic, the airflow coming from the bathroom and cooling the rest of the house. And this is where looking at exhaust fans and closing the window exhaust fans so you can get rid of the odour when you want to, but then you turn it off and you can keep the warmth in. These are also quite attractive and are popular in terms of just this radiant heat that comes out of these heat lamps, which are great in warming you, but don't use them to warm the bathroom. They're not designed for that. Radiant heat, stand under the light, you'll feel the heat on you. It's a wonderful sensation, but don't leave them on thinking you're going to warm the air. It'll warm the tiles where the light's striking, but they end up using a lot of electricity if you use them as a heater. But if you just enjoy the radiant heat on your body when you're wet, they're very effective. Now, newer models have self-sealing on them, so they're the ones to look for. If you've got old ones that don't seal, do not seal them with that draft stopper that I talked about earlier, because they'll overheat, they'll melt, and could be problematic with a fire. So if you've got one of these heaters that you can't seal, then you've got to seal the bathroom door from the rest of the house and just accept the bathroom's going to be cold. But if you can seal up the vents and shut the windows, you can have your cake and eat it, and you can have a warm bathroom, and you can also remove the moisture out of the bathroom. And the other place where the leaks are under the doors. And if you're in any doubt as to whether your doors are leaking, get on your hands and knees inside, look out, and you'll see light coming under if it's leaking. From the outside, it looked pretty good. From the inside, there's quite a decent gap and the air's coming in. These things are really good for external doors, and I see, Jack, you've got one here. Right there is a little disc, and when the door shuts, this swings around and the disc hits it and pushes that down and seals. When the door opens, it lifts. These are good for external doors, not for internal. Trip and hazard. You've got another model that lifts up, not out, for internal doors, but those ones are good for external doors. Right. And no doubt many of you would have seen the old sausage or snake. They're trip and hazards, get rid of them and switch over to these. Okay, now I want to move on to keeping the heat in the house, and this is all about insulation. And I want you to remember this little catchphrase that installation techniques trump insulation type. So it's the installation that is critical as to whether it works or not. So there are many different types of insulation that are available. They all work to various degrees. What is so critical is how well are they installed. And there's two main types of insulation, and when done well, they can complement. But the first one is about bulk insulation, whether it be bats or whether it be blow-in, And it's about trapping air within the insulation. And it's the trapped air that provides the insulation, not actually the material. And often I hear people saying, you know what, I squeezed that insulation in, I wanted more, so I bought fatter bats and I squeezed them in. I go, nah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to squeeze it because it's the air you've just squeezed out and you've compromised the insulation capability. So you've got to have them fresh and fluffy and they work. The other one is a sisolation or reflective foil is fantastic in reducing the amount of heat that is transferring through the roof cladding or the hot air that's in the roof cladding transferring through into the ceiling, into the living area. My preference in terms of all of these insulation, I like my preference is to stay away from the fiberglass because climbing into the cavities, roof cavities, I don't want to be exposed to that. Whereas the other products, you don't have the fine particles and it's a safe one. But they all work and they all work well. Again, used in the thermal imaging, you can see what's happening inside the roof cavity without having to climb up there. And again, the brighter colours are hotter. This was done in summer. So you can see this area is being well insulated, but across here, the installer ran out of steam and there's gaps in the roof cavity and this is where the heat is escaping. Across here, you've got blinds and windows and see how hot it is above the window. Something's going on there behind that blind and I'll get to it in a minute. The other thing to note is these exhaust fans. And here's my little pet favourite thing, are these portal access doors into the roof cavity. After several thousand roof inspections, two houses had insulation on this portal door. The rest exposed, and that's where the weak spot is. Now, in terms of wanting to know how significant are these small weak spots, the best way I can describe it, and I'd ask you to visualise, you look at the ceiling here and you've covered the ceiling in the roof, in the ceiling cavity with insulation. And looking at the job, they've covered it with 95%. So 95% of the area has been covered. Now, under most metrics, you would consider 95% is a pretty good score. Well, if the insulation is covering 95% of the ceiling, they've just reduced the effectiveness of that insulation in the living area by 50%. That 5% gap represents a drop in 50% of the performance of that insulation. Hence my comment, it's the installation that is critical, far more critical than your choice of insulation. And this is why blowing insulation can be ahead of the game because you can get 100% cover. And when I say 100% cover, there's a caveat. The caveat is where you've got electrical appliances in the roof and you've got to have space around them. Either way, you've got to have that as well. So the sort of things that I'm seeing is this needs about what would it be, about 200 mil gap around so that the electrical appliance doesn't get hot. The other thing we see is all these electrical and cables and double adapters. You do not want to cover them with insulation. The insulation has to come in under and they have to sit free. If you've got a house that you're wanting to upgrade your insulation, particularly if the house is more than about 40 years old, I'd suggest that you get rid of all of the insulation, clean it, vacuum it, get rid of the feces, the urine from the rats and mice that may have frequented when the previous people owned it, and get rid of all of that. And when you've got a clean slate, then you can see where the gaps are and you can fill those gaps. And an electrician then has good visibility of the condition of all the wiring, because some of the wiring may have been chewed by mice or rats, and you do not want insulation rubbing up against that. So you may need to upgrade the wiring that's in the roof cavity. You do that when the old stuff's removed, clean bill of health. The other thing is, if you've removed that, it's a great opportunity upgrading your downlights to the ones that can be covered. And then come in with your insulation. So when you're getting a quote to remove or upgrade your insulation, have a conversation about removing the old stuff and then cleaning the roof, having the ceiling cavity cleaned. One thing I find of interest here, there is an old bat, there is a new bat. Over time, the bats compress and just settle, but also today, people's expectations and standards have lifted significantly. And I've got a slide that'll give you some numbers around just what those changes are. And here is one of those inspection doors that doesn't have any insulation, would certainly benefit if it did. So in terms of the sort of things we see when we climb into the roof cavity, this is a photo I took back in 2012. And I've got it there, and I've got some more recent photos to show. And what I'd like to point out is how standards have shifted. Because when we were looking at these roofs, one, there's your gaps. This is pretty good. But why they forgot or didn't use and cover that room, it's anyone's guess. But this is common, that we would see some parts of the house not insulated. And then you would see the sparkies come through, and instead of cutting a hole in the insulation, they remove the whole bat. So look at that whole patch there, no insulation. And then, disappointingly, this is not a rare occurrence where homeowners have paid for someone to install insulation, it's still in the packets up in the roof cavity. Because very few homeowners go into their roof cavity, and some tradies know that. The other thing is, the installer for the insulation can do a perfect job, but then there's people that come in after them, electricians and plumbers, and sometimes they remove the bats and they don't put them back. Now, these two slides here, they're what is called loose fill or blow-in insulation. You get excellent coverage, but over time they settle a lot more than the bats. And also, if there's a fair bit of airflow in the roof cavity, they get moved around. And look at this pile here and over there, there's hardly any, and in some cases there's none. So this is one of the deficiencies of the blow-in, is it moves around and settles more. It's a trade-off. But you've got to be aware of these limitations. Across here, you can see insulation here. This is a roof cavity that's about 60 years old, and the bats have settled down to only being about 20 mil thick. And across here, you just see there's gaps where no insulation is. Now, I've talked about disturbance. So this insulation in a building that's about 10 years old has been disturbed and the bats weren't put back. This creates a significant problem in trying to keep the heat inside the building. Here, there is no insulation. And here, you can see the old insulation, and rather than pulling it out, and sometimes it is appropriate to leave it there, you can see the pink where they've put on more insulation. And here are some of the wire and cabling that they've left exposed. So you see, in some cases, that the tradies have taken full advantage of it. Now, when this photo was taken back in 2012, and back then, my answer to that question would be different than today. So it's a rhetorical question, but I want you to look at this, and there's a couple of things to look at. It's just good coverage, you can't see any plaster, and quite fluffy. And you've got the foil up here. But what I also notice is you've got the ceiling joists. Now the ceiling joists are only 90 mils high, typically, sometimes they might be 100 mil high. Have a look at the R value that you get with a 90 mil insulation bat. You get an R value of 2. Now if you're building a new house today, the minimum stand is 3.5. Many people put an R value of 4, and have a look up here how thick it is. And if you're going to start a new lease in a rental property in 2027, the landlord is now required to put R5 insulation in. A couple of years' time, new lease, that's what is required. This is what we're looking at. And we thought that back in 2012 was pretty good. So things are shifting, we're getting better insulation. But you've got to be careful what you wish for, because as you go thicker, it creates other problems. All the cabling, you've got to pay more attention to the existing wiring through the roof cavity. That's important. And the other thing is, as houses are being built without eaves, it's harder to get to the edge of the house inside the living cavity, and the roof is so much lower. So there's no way you're going to be fitting R5s around the perimeter of the living area in the ceiling cavity. Fortunately, there are other types of insulation which are denser and can compensate that, but it still becomes a weak point compared to the thicker insulation. Now, the other thing to look at is the sisolation. It's a neat job, it's pulled tight. Now the sisolation principally is put in the roof cavity to reduce the incidence of condensation. And more, in years gone by, it was just sisolation. Now common, you will see an R1, maybe 10 mil of bulk insulation with the foil to reduce the amount of condensation. It reduces the noise of the rain if you've got tin, but it also means that insulation under the foil gets moist during the winter periods. So again, having the sisolation pulled tight means less airflow is going between the roof cladding and the sisolation. And most people, when they install sisolation, they pull it tight, looks good. Read the instructions on every packet and it says, do not do that. It says, leave it loose, let it sag. So you've got more of an air gap and more opportunity for the air to move. And then when it comes to insulation under the floor, if you've got floorboards and if it's easy to access, then there's a range of products that go under the floorboards. And remember, you're losing about 15% of the heat through the floorboard, so if you can access it, it's a process that's worth going into. Now, looking at what's happening on the windows, this is not about air, this is about the heat passing from the living area out through the windows. And there's three scenarios in this diagram. And the first one is where you've got a window and there's no curtain and no pelmet. And the warmth or heat inside the house will pass out through the window. Now, if you've got double glazing, it'll still pass out, but a lot slower. If you've got curtains, it will reduce the amount of heat that's passing out, but watch what happens around the curtain. Remember that thermal image I had of the blind and the heat on top of the blind? So what's happening when you've got a blind or a curtain against the window and you don't have a pelmet is you've got air moving up and down between the glass and the furnishing. So in this case, you will see the cold passing out, but also cold air is heavier than warm air, so you actually get air flowing between the curtain or blind and the window and out into the room. So if this was a blind and I'm sitting here and there's no pelmet, I will feel a draft. And the draft is coming from there. And this is why you need pelmets. One, it keeps the dust off the curtains and blinds, but two, it stops that draft. And here are a couple of examples. You can have the pelmet that is built into the cornice of the ceiling so it doesn't stand out, or you can have a box pelmet that does stand out, or you can have something of a softer finish. Now, quite often these are just cosmetic and there's nothing at the top, so you need to modify so there's actually a lid on the top as well to stop that air movement. And what we've noticed that a lot of these pelmets were designed for curtains, so they're quite wide, and people have now put blinds in there, so now you've got a big gap as it doesn't work as well. It's got to be a snug fit. The next one is heat is lost out through the windows. Because many of our clients are on a fairly tight budget, the conversation often quickly gravitates away from double glazing to what are the alternatives. And bubble wrap is actually a functional alternative. Bit of an eyesore, but you've got a few windows that you can't see, but you can put bubble wrap on them and they'll provide a level of insulation that you'll notice a difference. You can also get some perspex or acrylic in a frame and you can seal up a temporary double glazing. And then there's another product that's pretty hard to see, but my next slide will tell you, but you can get this plastic that you can stick over the window frame, heat it, shrinks, removes all the crinkles, and there's your double glazing because it's trapping the air between the plastic and the glass. And then of course you can go with double glazing. Now the early double glazing, when I say early, I'm thinking 15 years ago, it became quite popular and it was 5-6 mil gap between the glass planes. You may as well have thrown it out and just stuck with a single plane. Whereas today you'll see the gap is at least double that, and that's a lot more effective. And then you've got options of whether it be wood, aluminium or PVC. And if it's aluminium, you've negated most of the benefits unless the aluminium frames have a thermal break, basically have an insulation in them. But the wood and the PVC is a very good product for the window frames. So this is what's called a clear comfort. It's a plastic, a bit like Glad wrap, and you stick it on the window. And these are the tools of trade. It's a hairdryer, some sticky tape and some scissors. Measure it, cut and quote, stick it on, heat it, and you can't see it. We did this on our office and it lasted for about 15 years. Looks a bit tacky, but it works.
What about the tinted windows? Is that tinting that's applied to the glass, which is more, makes very attractive, but does it have any effect on
Yes.
and cool?
Yes, it can reduce the amount of heat transfer and reduce the amount of light. The more heat you want reduced, the more light that is prevented going through it. But the tintings, and there's a range of products that also work.
Then, if you wanted to do it, which I've actually considered, how would you know if what you're putting on is going to be effective? Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. So it's a conversation to have with the specialists, because there's a whole range. You'll see some houses that have mirror type glazing, which can be problematic in terms of your relations with your neighbours. So that's something to consider, but it also means that the house is a lot darker. So, but they do reduce the temperature and significantly reduce the amount of light in order to be effective. I want to move on to the heating. So in terms of the sequence, we're trying to keep the air in, trying to keep the heat in, and now we're looking at generating the heat. Clear sequence. And gas heating, and the reason I want to touch on the gas heating is, and these brochures are here for those who weren't here before we started, who were here a lot earlier. I would like you to have a look at these, and if we can just circulate them to those who didn't get one. And this is in recognition that I think it was about 15 years ago, there were 2 young children that perished in Mooroopna from carbon monoxide poisoning, and some of you may recall that. And it was a tragedy. The mother's response was she wanted everyone to know about carbon monoxide. And for a 10-year period, she campaigned just constantly in getting the industry standards to recognise that carbon monoxide is a silent killer and people need to be aware of it. So if you've got gas heaters, even flue gas heaters, if they're not maintained correctly, they will produce carbon monoxide, and it is potentially lethal. So whenever we talk about sealing up houses, one of the first things we do is we look to see, do you have an unflued gas heater? And we say, we will give you, we'll do no retrofit work in trying to keep the air in your house until the unflued gas heater is decommissioned and removed. It's that serious. And with these fluid heaters, it's not as problematic, but it is still a problem. And the gas heaters need to be serviced at least every 2 years. And what you're servicing to make sure that the pilot burns clean. Because if it doesn't burn clean, it then accumulates with carbon monoxide. So even when the pilot is on and the heater's not on, it's problematic. So it's important to have them serviced every 2 years. The reason when I'm talking about heating and I'm talking about ceiling fans is the ceiling fans is a very low cost way of keeping a house cool in summer and warm in winter. It's a bit counterintuitive, but every fan has a winter-summer setting. And when in winter you're heating, the first thing is the heat goes up and settles around the ceiling, away from where the occupants are. But if you put your ceiling fans on, you can draw that air back down. Now, if you have it on the summer setting, it'll create a draft and you'll get a wind chill factor and you'll turn the fan off because it'll be noticeably cold. But if you put it on the winter setting, the fan goes the opposite direction and it actually draws the air up and mixes with the warm air, and then that diffuses through the room. You won't feel the draft, but the temperature will rise a few degrees. So that's a combination of your heating and the fan is a great combination.
Geoff, is it clockwise or anti-clockwise? Which is
I deliberately didn't say that because I can't remember. But
because we tested it at home and we were cold both ways.
yeah.
It doesn't say winter or summer, it just says forward or reverse.
So have a look at the angle of the fins of the fan and it will tell you whether it's pushing it down or pushing it up.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And if you're still feeling it, maybe it was on the lowest setting.
Yeah, put up really high.
But yeah, so you've got to have it on the lowest setting. But then in some cases your fan might be too low, so you will feel a little bit of draft.
Yeah.
And this is just acknowledging the Chas Tyler Foundation and the brochure that I've circulated. So please read it, please be mindful of it. It's a conversation it's worth having. Friends and families that have got gas heaters, be aware of this. Gas stoves are not a problem when it comes to carbon monoxide. The gas that you smell is not the thing that's going to send you to sleep. It's the carbon monoxide. You don't smell it, you don't taste it, you don't hear it. That's what you've got to watch out for by doing the maintenance. But the gas stove is not a problem from carbon monoxide point of view. But it's very problematic if you've got respiratory illnesses and you're very sensitive to airborne and gas-borne particles that will exacerbate respiratory illnesses. So there's a big push in reducing people's electricity bills, getting off gas, reducing carbon emissions. And whilst I support those initiatives, what's far more important is for people to get off gas to improve the air quality in the house and reduce the respiratory adverse impacts on respiratory conditions. Can't overstate it. It's a really important issue to get off gas to improve the air quality in your house. And when it comes to heating, instead of heating the whole house, these draft stoppers shut off rooms that you don't use frequently, so you don't have to heat the whole house, you only heat the house that you occupy. Now there's a program down in Geelong a year or two ago that rather than improving the thermal performance of the whole house, they said we'll improve it of 2 rooms, the kitchen, lounge, dining, and went about putting the insulation and the draft proofing on that part of the house because of the financial constraints of the occupant. She said, well, you can get the benefit of where you spend most of your time, and you don't actually need to have a heated bedroom, have a electric blanket if that's what you want, but it's more important to have the kitchen, dine, lounge heated, insulated and warm and comfortable, and then go to bed and get under the doona and put the electric blanket on. Electric blankets use hardly any electricity, so don't worry about it in terms of your utility bill. So zoning is important. The temperature you set is important. Now, one thing I've learned is not to give unsolicited advice. Took me a while. So I don't tell you what temperature to set the thermometer or the thermostat. But what I do tell you, that if you set it at 20 degrees and that's not warm enough and you want to go to 21, you've just increased the energy consumption by 10%. So if you want to set it at 25 degrees, and many people do, 50% increase in the running cost of that heater. You make the decision, be aware you've just increased by 50% if you go from 20 to 25 degrees. So the other one, so that's what I'm calling the 10% rule. So for every degree above 20, it adds 10% to your running costs. And then seal off and close the doors in the area so you don't have to heat them. And then this question that I get asked many, many times, do we turn the heater off when we leave the house? And like a good bureaucrat and politician, it depends. But it depends on many things because the houses vary so much. But essentially, if you've got good insulation, the house will slow down and you could turn the heat off. If you have leaks like a sieve, you probably want to keep it so that all the furnishings retain the heat. But it depends. And this is one of my last slides. And this one is about the concessions that are available. Now, on the news this morning, there was talk about how many people were struggling to pay their bills, and they actually interviewed someone who had a utility bill debt of $6,000. Now, I want to just highlight what opportunities there are to help you navigate through that space. And I don't know the person, I don't know the case, so I won't make any specific reference to that. But there are packages that provide up to $650 per utility every 2 years. So $650 towards your gas, $650 towards your water, your electricity. And if you don't have reticulated gas and you're burning wood, you can get a discount off that. And every 2 years, you can claim that. What we know when we did a survey of 1,000 households, 25% of people that were entitled to claim this never did. In fact, they didn't even claim the controlled load, the 13%, or the 17.5% discount either, because they thought they were already getting it because the bill said they were getting a discount. So it's about this whole thing around understanding what the bills are telling us. This is really important in understanding. So have a scan there. If you're burning wood, you'll see that there's assistance there. If you're on LP gas, there's assistance. And if you're behind in your bills, there's opportunities here to get bill relief. And importantly, there's a free service in getting financial advice to help you unpack this. As part of my work and my colleagues' work, we have come across several thousand people doing it tough. And we know we can help direct them to the people that will give impartial and qualified advice. So if you're in arrears or you know people that are in arrears, get them to pick up the phone and talk to the retailer, because the retailer is obligated to help them navigate through this space. And if they don't, and you go to the Ombudsman, they're in all sorts of strife. So you can be pretty confident that they're going to help you because they know that they're obligated to do that. So when I heard about the $6,000 debt this morning, I just shook my head and I was so disappointed because I put my last dollar that I reckon they hadn't used these services to navigate through there. Off-peak, there was a question about off-peak before. And this is a question that a conversation I've been having for 17 years since I've been working in this space, and it keeps shifting. In the past, it was easy. That at 11 o'clock at night, the cheap power came on and it stopped at 7 in the morning. And then daylight saving came. And during daylight saving, it started at midnight and went to 8 in the morning. And the difference in peak and off-peak was significant. It was 5, 6, 7 times difference. Today, it's somewhere maybe half, maybe 20, 75%, but the difference is less, but the time frames are very different and variable depending on your retailer. And some retailers don't acknowledge daylight saving and some do. 5 years ago, none of them did. So rather than giving, and I've got about 10 different scenarios and I won't go through them, but enough suffice to say they're there, and if people ask more questions, I'll get to them. But the answer is talk to your retailer, because the different retailers have different peak and off-peak and different tariffs. So the take-home messages in pulling this together, we started with focusing on a hot climate and dealing with keeping the house cool as a priority. Keep that in the fore of your mind when you're looking at this. It's the 12-month cycle that's important, so you've got to keep that sun off those windows in summer. The second one was about keeping the warm in the house, the warm air in, so that means you seal the gaps. Remember, sealing gaps can also reduce the air quality, so if you've got any gas appliances, carbon monoxide monitor, maintain your gas appliances to reduce the risk of carbon monoxide. And then we move on to keeping the heat in with insulation. And the sobering thought is cold houses make people sick. When a heat wave comes through, it kills people. Cold houses kill about 15 times the number, but instead of it happening on 1 or 2 days, it happens over the long winter. So it's a slow, agonising death. Bit of drama for you. But it's about, you've got to lift that bottom temperature and the average temperature in winter to maintain good health. So cold houses make people sick. We know that. We were involved in a project where 1,000 houses were insulated and done to best practice. And what we know over 2 years, there was a significant improvement in people's health. And it also reduced their utility bills. But for every dollar that was saved by improving the insulation and the thermal properties of all the things we've talked about tonight, for every dollar it saved on their utility bill, it saved $10 on their medical bill. This is why these sort of things are important. They have a profoundly positive impact on people's health if we do it. And then if you're interested in talking about energy assessments or solar batteries, hot water, we broker projects as well, both domestic and commercial. I'm going to open it up back to you, Jack, and see if there's any questions.